On the night of July 8th, 1988, an oil and gas platform operating in the North Sea, just off the coast of Scotland, was the scene of a dramatic disaster. 2 days earlier, that rig, which was known as the Piper Alpha, had suddenly burst into flames in the middle of the night because of a massive gas leak on board. As the Piper Alpha exploded and burned in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of crew members stationed on board that rig were thrust into a fight for their lives. For hours, giant fireballs engulfed the rig as gas continued to flow up to the platform, feeding the flames. And then on July 8th, 1988, this day 23 years ago, the massive loss of life that resulted from that disaster started to become evident.
Rescue workers in the North Sea, now they say they have given up any hope of finding any more of the 149 men still missing in the oil rig fire there. 17 men are confirmed dead.
One survivor called it the Big Bang, an explosion that turned the huge oil platform into an inferno. Several more explosions and the platform split in two. Most workers were asleep, trapped in their bedrooms by smoke and flames.
After the Piper Alpha exploded in the North Sea and burned, the only hope for survival for the men on board were rescue vessels that arrived on scene to try to put out the flames. But even those rescue vessels were beset by difficulties. 2 rescuers were killed after burning oil set fire to their rescue boat. And then there was the main firefighting vessel that arrived at the scene, the one that you see here. That vessel was in part crippled by its own bad design. Its rescue bridge and its firefighting system were both hobbled as it tried to respond to the disaster. The Alpha Piper explosion ended up killing 167 oil workers in all, making it the deadliest oil disaster in history. This massive loss of life, triggered by mechanical and safety failures on the rig, served as a wake-up call for the oil industry, which promised to change its ways going forward.
What has happened at Piper is, in my opinion, going to cause an acceleration of a whole number of changes.
An acceleration of a whole number of changes in the oil industry. Oil drilling after Piper Alpha would be much, much safer now, we promise. That firefighting vessel that arrived on scene of the Piper Alpha, the one with the design flaws that kept it from doing much good, that vessel is still out there. It still exists. At least the last time I looked at my watch, it still existed. That rig came to be known as the Transocean Marianas rig. The Transocean Marianas is currently on the verge of sinking off the coast of Africa. Last year, on the 22nd anniversary of the Piper Alpha disaster, which again was the accident that was going to be the real wake-up call for the drilling industry in terms of safety, last year this was the top story in the country.
We turn again now to the mess in the Gulf on day 80. Here's where we are. Oil has now come ashore along 507 miles of coastline in all 5 Gulf states, and there's oil now north of New Orleans.
The Deepwater Horizon oil disaster, the worst oil spill in U.S. history. In a twist of fate, the rig that actually started drilling that BP well in the Gulf was the same rig that is now sinking off the coast of Africa, the same rig that was called on to respond to the deadliest oil disaster in history 23 years earlier, and that could not do what it was supposed to do when it got there. The Alpha Piper disaster was supposed to be this big wake-up call for the oil industry. Today, 23 years to the day after that disaster, this is what one of America's greatest rivers looks like. Miles and miles of Montana's Yellowstone River fouled in ExxonMobil brand crude oil after yet another oil industry mishap. It's now been a full week since an Exxon pipeline burst below the Yellowstone River, and this is what Exxon's cleanup response has looked like since: big paper towel-like absorbent pads. That's what they've got. Montana's Governor Brian Schweitzer, who began this disaster working alongside Exxon officials, is now openly criticizing the company's response. Yesterday, Governor Schweitzer pulled members of his staff out of a joint oil spill command center. He accused Exxon of violating the state's open government requirements by withholding information from the public and by posting Exxon security guards at the command site. Today, Mr. Schweitzer opened up his own spill command center, telling the residents who gathered there, quote, "This is your office." The governor held up a soil sample jar. That's what you see him holding there. He told the crowd not to trust Exxon to do it, but to take samples of their own soil on their own property and document the process with photographs and video. Governor Schweitzer has also launched an emergency review of all of the oil and gas pipelines in his state that cross under waterways. He's also demanding that Exxon's CEO tell the state of Montana everything they know about the type of oil that has been spilled into Montana's Yellowstone River. If Montana Governor Brian Schweitzer and ExxonMobil were partners when this oil disaster began, it is becoming clearer and clearer by the day that that is no longer the case. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts. He's the ranking member of the House Natural Resources Committee. He's also called for congressional hearings to investigate the Yellowstone River spill. Congressman Markey, thanks very much for being with us tonight. I appreciate it.
No, you're welcome.
Can I get your reaction to Governor Schweitzer's actions, moving his staff out of this joint command center, accusing Exxon of violating open government laws and not doing it right, basically?
Well, it's exactly what the Coast Guard had to do last summer after 30 days of being deceived by BP on the Gulf of Mexico spill. They ultimately said, no, we are now going to control the flow of information. So Governor Schweitzer in Montana right now is just realizing that oil companies, when they have oil spills, wind up first being told by their lawyers that we have to protect the liability of the oil company before we protect the livability of the areas that they have polluted. And this is just a lesson that keeps getting repeated. You've gone back over the last 23 years, but that is something that you could use today, and you have appropriately, because they just refuse to ultimately deal with these safety issues in a way that reduces their impact on the citizens of our country.
It's both the safety issues in terms of preventing disasters like this in the first place, maintaining safe equipment and operations. It's also their ability to respond when something goes wrong. ExxonMobil is making $5 million in profit every hour, but their cleanup crews are out there trying to treat these contaminated areas. They're using boom that they're not doing that great a job with. They're using absorbent pads. It's technology that hasn't changed in over 40 years. Is there anything that can be done to mandate improvements in this area?
Well, in the legislation, the BP safety legislation that I authored last year, there was a requirement that the industry had to move to new modern technologies in order to clean up these spills, in order to prevent the spills. But as we know, the Republicans have blocked that legislation. No legislation has passed since the BP spill last summer. The lessons have not been incorporated. The Blue Ribbon Commission that came back and listed all of the problems, that was essentially a blistering, scalding indictment of the safety measures which the oil industry has in place. All of them still remain in place. And so, yeah, we're still using boom. We're still using here absorbent pads. People probably thought that we would go to MIT, not CVS, in order to find the technology that we would be using, but the industry still refuses to accept new legislation that would mandate them to move to a modern technological era.
The House Republican budget would cut the budget for the government's drilling oversight agency by a third. Do you think that would have a material effect on safety issues?
We began the debate today in the House of Representatives on the Republican energy bill of 2011. In the bill, they cut wind, they cut solar, they cut biomass and geothermal, they cut hybrids, they cut plug-in, they cut all-electric vehicles, they cut conservation and efficiency. What did they increase? The budget for oil drilling, gas drilling, coal mining, for the Yucca Mountain nuclear power plant, but for safety, no. Safety gets cut. So wherever we talk about energy future, that budget gets cut. Wherever we talk about this energy past, this fossil fuel past, unbelievably, as they cut Medicare, as they cut Medicaid, as they cut Social Security, there's plenty of dough left for an oil industry that is tipping consumers upside down at the gas pump every time someone pulls in to refill their tank.
Democratic Congressman Ed Markey of Massachusetts, thanks very much for your time tonight, sir. I really appreciate it.